Hello, 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 TM24 here, and we are back with some more Marvel Snap content. Now, if it's your first time finding the channel, welcome. I hope you find this video entertaining and informative, as we're going to be talking about the 5 most common / best performing decks in the meta right now. If you are a returning viewer, I really do appreciate the continued support. My llama here appreciates it, but let's start talking about these decks. You can see them here. I've got the names outlined. If you watched my most recent video, I kind of go over the Sera control deck a little bit more in depth, but I'm going to pull it up here anyway so that we can take a look at it. So, Sera control. This deck has been around for a long time. A couple cards are getting switched in and out here, but this is probably one of the most flexible and kind of strongest decks that always seems to be, in the top 5 of the meta, regardless of, the new cards coming in and things like that. So this is a really good deck to learn and learn well, as you can continue to climb with just this deck. So if there's any one deck that I'm going to recommend that you learn, kind of to the fullest, it would be this one. It's always going to be around, super strong. But let's talk about these cards, right? Our 1-drops, we've got Kitty Pryde and Nova. Kitty Pryde's great ever since she's been included. Being able to play her over and over again, especially when you've got cards like Angela and Bishop in your deck, on your board preferably. Kitty Pryde's just going to continue to grow as she buffs those as well. Nova, as you can see, is the only other 1-drop, and that's because we have Killmonger, which we'll get to him in a second. But obviously, the idea behind Nova is destroying it to buff all your other cards. Now we've got 5 2-drops, Angela, Hitmonkey, Scarlet Witch, Sentinel, and Mysterio. Now, preferably, Angela, Scarlet Witch, Sentinel, those can be played fairly early depending on what the board looks like and what the locations are. Angela, always a good play on 2. Sentinel is great. You can get Sentinel down, 3 power, and you're refilling your hand. Scarlet Witch is awesome for location, kind of control. I know it's a random, but at least you can get it down, and she is cheap. Now, Hitmonkey and Mysterio, I'm typically holding those until later. Turn 4 is always a good option for, both of them together, as that Hitmonkey is going to be a nice, it's going to be 6 power, and you get Mysterio out there as well. If you got Angela and Bishop on the board, you're buffing them as well. But I also like to hold Hitmonkey until turn 6, if possible, just to get the most value out of Hitmonkey that we can. Mysterio, we know, is great with this deck. Tons of synergy with Hitmonkey. You're buffing Angela, you're buffing Bishop, so Mysterio is a really nice inclusion in this as well. Now our 3-drops, we've got Bishop and Killmonger. Getting Bishop down is huge. Bishop can scale really nicely, especially if you're playing Mysterio, if you're playing Kitty Pryde over and over. It can just feel like a really strong card. And I know I've said this once, I've said it twice, I've said it 1,000 times. If you play Angela and then Bishop on top of Angela, it almost feels like you've already won that lane. So I love that. I love going Angela right into Bishop, because then you can kind of focus on your other lanes and play, maybe one extra card there if you need to. But hey, I just love those 2 cards together. Killmonger, it's in here to destroy our Nova, to take care of our opponents, Sunspots, Nebulas, maybe even Kitty Prydes if you can take theirs out. And because we are controlling when we're playing our Killmonger, we can make sure that our Kitty Pryde survives. So no real problem there, but Killmonger, another great card to have included. Our 4-drops. Our 4-drops are going to essentially be answers to what our opponent has going on. Shang-Chi is destroying, we know what Shang-Chi does, right? Shang-Chi is destroying all the enemy cards that have over 9 power, super strong. And then Enchantress, she's removing the abilities of ongoing. So you're taking care of things like Patriot, Cerebro, Devil Dinos, Darkhawks, Nulls, things like that. So 2 great cards to have that will answer what your opponent is bringing. And then, of course, the deck is centered around Sera. She's giving us those discounts down to 1, allowing us to pull off insane turn 6s with tons of power coming down. Now, what I really like about this deck, and like I said, I went into the previous video a lot more in depth. I'll see if I can put a link here to it as well if you guys want to watch that one. But I love the flexibility that this deck has. I love that you can kind of build your power throughout the game with Angela and Bishop, and you still have the option to go big on turn 6 through a huge dump of Hitmonkey, you know, a big kitty pride if you've been playing her. And then you also have answers, and I love having answers to what my opponent has going on. So those are 3 huge pluses. This deck seems like it can win against pretty much anything. I would say the one area that it maybe would struggle is if a Sandman came down, because then you can't really get the most out of these cards. But other than that, this deck feels like it can win against pretty much anything. So like I said, if I'm recommending one deck to learn to the fullest, it's going to be this one. If you don't have all of these cards, you can definitely replace some of them. Some of them that I feel are maybe a little bit more crucial. Hitmonkey is great for, you know, those huge bursts of power. If you don't have Hitmonkey, you know, I get that. That can be a little bit tough. Lizard is not a bad option. You know, he's 5 power on his own. You force your opponent to commit to that lane. So you do have other options if you don't have, you know, something like Hitmonkey. If you're not a big fan of one of these two, I always recommend something like a Spider-Man to give yourself an advantage in one of those lanes. You know, you're still keeping your costs down and kind of playing in that same vein. Spider-Man maybe doesn't work as well because you're aiming to hit Sera on 5, but if you don't have Sera on 5, playing Spider-Man, not a bad option to lock them out of a, you know, lock them out of a lane. So this deck, like I said, super flexible, super strong, can answer your opponent, and is always going to be around. So definitely take the time to learn this one. But let's look at the next one, which is a newcomer here, and we'll go right to it. It is going to be this High Evolutionary lockdown deck. Now, I recently got, you know, High Evolutionary, so I've been playing around with it, and this is one of the decks that is kind of leading his charge, and I can see why for sure. You've got a couple of great 1-drops in both Sunspot and Nebula. You've got pretty much all the High Evolutionary, you know, other pieces. Yeah, you're missing 2 of them, but you've got the good ones. You've got Wasp, you've got Cyclops, Thing, Abomination, and Hulk. So I love the combination here of, you know, using what High Evolutionary is bringing while also keeping some really strong pieces elsewhere. Like I said, Sunspot, Nebula, they're great. Spider-Man, Professor X to lock down a lane, awesome as well. Doctor Doom, in case you need to reach a lane that has maybe been stormed, or maybe you've been Spider-Man and you know, they don't think you can reach it, Doctor Doom still gives you that potential. So this is a newcomer to the meta, obviously, because High Evolutionary wasn't in the game, but I really like the blend here of using what he brings, which I'll scroll through these real quickly just so you guys can see them. Wasp, afflicting 2 random cards with -1. Misty Knight, here it is, not going to be in this deck. Neither is Shocker. I would say those are probably 2 of the weaker of the High Evolutionary, you know, buffs that he gives these cards. Cyclops, afflicting 2 random enemies with -1 if you have unspent energy. The Thing, afflicting a random enemy with -1 power, repeating it twice. Abomination is having his cost reduced for each enemy card that is afflicted with negative power. I've played him for 1 more times than I can count, and like I said, I just got him, you know, High Evolutionary recently. And then of course the Hulk, +2 power for each turn you ended with unspent energy. And it's super easy to do that in this deck. You've got Sunspot, so you're fine just kind of, you know, maybe passing a turn, or maybe only playing a Nebula next to it, something like that. You've got Storm to kind of, you know, try and lock down a lane. If your Abomination is cheap, he's coming right back after that Storm. You're pretty much winning that lane. The rest of these cards, we kind of just saw them. Cyclops, we got Spider-Man to lock out, Professor X to lock out, and, you know, other power in the form of Doctor Doom. And then Hulk can get crazy. He can be an Infinite on 6 easily. So a really, really strong deck. I've had good results even though I just started playing it. Like I said, I've been kind of tinkering around with, you know, the High Evolutionary. Haven't had a chance to play all his decks. I'm hoping to, and then maybe get a video out on that as well. But this just seems like a really, really strong deck. It's got tons of ways to win. You know, Sunspot can carry. Nebula forces their hand. You can lock them out with Storm. Spider-Man, Professor X. This is just a super, super strong deck. I think this will be around for a while. So if you've got High Evolutionary, Definitely give this one a shot, as it is worth learning. But let's get into the next one. It's a deck that's been around and has been staying relevant in the meta even as it changes, and that's going to be Modoc Discard. Now, the only change that, I've kind of really seen is this inclusion of Swordmaster. I don't like the randomness of Swordmaster, but I can see why he's included. So overall, this is a pretty standard list, right? You've got Nebula for 1, forcing your opponent to play. Morbius is probably the best two drop that you can play in this deck. Otherwise, if you could play a Colleen Wing free, knowing it's going to hit Wolverine or Swarm, not a bad option for 2. On 3, you're either looking to Storm, or maybe you're trying to buff your Apocalypse with Lady Sif. Turn 4 belongs to Dracula, just like turn 5 belongs to Modok. Obviously, Modok is discarding your whole hand. Hopefully, you're hitting these swarms, so you'll get a couple of free ones, and sending Wolverine onto the battlefield as well, being buffed with +2 power. And then what that allows you to do is pick what you want to do on 6. If you've got Dracula down, you can either go with your Apocalypse, and then Dracula will hit Chavez, or maybe you just go Chavez and you need the power on your Dracula. Again, this deck has been around for a while. It's a really, really strong deck as well. I will say what I don't really care for is it doesn't feel like there's a ton of flexibility to your play. You're looking for Nebula on 1, you're looking for Morbius on 2, you're looking for Storm or Lady Sif, and I guess in this deck's case, Swordmaster on 3, Dracula on 4, Modok on 5. So, I mean, this deck kind of plays itself, which is a great thing because it's consistent and it's consistently strong. It does struggle with answering what your opponent has, as there's no, there's no Shang-Chi, there's no Enchantress, things like that. But this deck is still super strong. You can easily get you wins, and you can definitely climb with it as well. So again, a deck that's been around for a long time, but one definitely worth learning. Let's move on to the next one, though. Next, we've got Null Death. So these, destroy decks have definitely started coming back. I thought for sure when Wave was nerfed that it might have, kind of been the beginning of the end for all these death-style decks. But this one is coming around, and it's a pretty good one, right? You've got a couple of 1-drops. You've got Nova, and you've got Angel. Now, I'm not a big fan of Angel, but in testing this one, it was kind of hit or miss. Sometimes I was like, oh, okay, nice. We get an extra 2. When it's in your hand, it doesn't feel that great. You don't mind playing it on 1, but when it's one of your late turn draws, it definitely can feel pretty bad sometimes. So if I'm changing anything on this deck, I'm probably taking Angel out, and maybe I'm including something like the Hood, or maybe a different 1-drop. But I can see why it's included, and sometimes the surprise 2 power is nice. Now your 2-drops, you've got Bucky, Carnage, Wolverine. I mean, we all understand what these cards are doing in this deck, right? Bucky, you're trying to destroy to get to the Winter Soldier. Carnage is doing the destroying and powering up while he does so. Wolverine, you're fine destroying this as many times as you can to continually get those +2 buffs on him. And, it's pretty standard, not too bad at all. Now, our 3-drops, we've got 3 of them, and 1 is kind of a surprise inclusion here. And actually, let's start with that one. It's Sabretooth. When destroyed, returns to your hand, it costs 0. Now, he felt a little bit clunky earlier in the game, but he seemed to find a decent home here, just because, you can get him down on 3, and then on 4, you don't have any 4-drops. So you feel fine going Venom or Deathlock to actually take advantage of that ability. Now, we talked about Venom. Venom is going to be one of your huge sources of power, right? You're adding their power to this card, and you're fine pretty much destroying anything because of that ability. Obviously, if you've got an 8-power, Carnage, and a 6 from Winter Soldier, maybe you don't want to destroy those, but again, it's not a bad option. Deathlock is just great. Playing Bucky and then Deathlock, it feels like you've won that lane. So those are 2, kind of really nice cards that simply go 2 right into 3. And because we don't have any 4s and we don't have any 5s, you're kind of piecing together those turns, which is probably why this deck is working the way it is, because you're feeling fine to just go with, maybe it's Angel and Venom on 4, or maybe it's Wolverine into Carnage on 4. 5 can be, Killmonger Carnage. You've got options. You've got a little bit more flexibility in the old death style decks. But let's talk about our 6 drops here. 6 drops and up, I should say. Pretty standard death. We're trying to get her down to 0, by destroying as many cards as we can. Maybe we're destroying Wolverine 2 or 3 times to help in that goal. So obviously we're trying to get death down. Null is going to have the combined powers of all the cards destroyed, can definitely power up pretty quickly. Now Zola, a little bit of a surprise inclusion in this deck, but totally makes sense. If you can Zola something like your Venom, or if your death does get down to 0, you can death and Zola on the same turn. So I really like the inclusion of Zola for the fact that it's adding power that you otherwise don't have access to. Additionally, it's reaching lanes that you otherwise can't reach. So I think Zola is a really, really cool, smart inclusion in this deck, and definitely gives it a little bit more punch than it otherwise would have. Again, this deck feels, I'm still kind of feeling it out. Like I said, I'm not a big fan of Angel, so maybe I would take Angel out. But overall, it feels pretty solid. It feels like it can compete. But as I always say, I don't like not having answers, and this deck has none. So you're playing your cards, and your goal is to just have more power than them, play them on the right locations. This deck can definitely do it, but I like to be able to answer what my opponent's got going on. So, kind of depends on your play style. Again, a really good deck. Definitely one, that you should give a shot if you got these cards. It's not too expensive. There's a couple cards up there, but overall it should be a pretty accessible deck that most people, have access to. So definitely a deck worth giving a shot. But I think I've got one more here for you, and it's a classic. It's a deck that is floating in and out of the meta. Sometimes it feels like it's got a really good spot, and then other times it feels like it couldn't get a win to save its life. So it's just a standard Patriot list. You know how to play Patriot by now, but we'll still go through it, right? Our ones, we've got Squirrel Girl and Misty Knight. I prefer going Misty Knight just because I don't like using up too many of my spaces early, but Squirrel Girl is not a bad option. We know what Wasp does. You're holding Wasp ideally until turn 6, as she's going to be free, so there's no rush in playing her. Now, our only 2-drop is going to be Shocker, and not a bad play there. He's getting the buff from Patriot, so we understand how Shocker works. Our 3-drops, we have 4 of them. We know how Patriot works, and he's buffing all the cards with no abilities, which is, as we look at this deck, it's pretty much every other card that you're going to play outside of your 6 drops. So, Patriot, awesome. Mystique to copy Patriot, great. Debris, I really love the inclusion of Debris because of the disruption that she brings. She's adding a rock to the other location, rocks that are useful and valuable to you that your opponent might not be able to get any value out, and you could potentially lock up a lane. So love the inclusion of Debris in this Patriot deck. Cyclops, we know what he is. He's a 3/4 that's getting buffed by Patriot. The Thing, pretty standard, 4/6. And then our 5-drop is going to be Blue Marvel, buffing everything else up. And then we've got 2 6-drops. We've got Onslaught to, maybe we're buffing the Patriot and Blue Marvel lane. That's obviously what you're looking to do if you're playing Onslaught. Otherwise, you're playing Ultron, you're bringing the drones out, you're buffing the drones. Ideally, Patriot's already down, so that these drones can be huge. Now, this deck, just like the discard deck that we were talking about, it feels like it kind of plays itself. You know what you're doing on 1. You're playing Squirrel Girl or Misty Knight. Ideally, 2 is Shocker. If not, it's Misty Knight or Squirrel Girl. 3 is where you can start making decisions depending on what's in your hand. So do you need to get Patriot down early? Do you know, is Patriot still in your deck, but you've got Mystique? That doesn't really help you. So then you're looking, can you play Debris or Cyclops? You know, that's where you can start making your decisions. 4, if you can play the thing, great. If not, playing a Debris alongside a Misty Knight or a Cyclops alongside a Squirrel Girl, something like that to kind of fill out your curve. 5, of course, you're looking for Blue Marvel, or you're looking for another combination of, you know, getting cards down, whether at that point it's Cyclops and Shocker, or Debris, Misty Knight, and Squirrel Girl. You're starting to get your power out there for your turn 6 play, which again is probably going to be either Onslaught, Ultron, or a combination of Patriot and Mystique, depending on how your board looks and what you have going on and what's going to give you the best chance to win. Now, I've never been a big fan of these Patriot style decks, but it keeps sticking around. It's got a high usage, it's got a very solid win rate, and I can see why. It can be tough to deal with decks that go wide, and Patriot's probably the best at doing that. So definitely good knowing how to play this one, because it keeps coming back. So these have been the 5 decks that are kind of shaping / running the meta right now. They've got the highest usage rate and very solid win rates. So like I said, if I had to pick one, learn the Sera control. It's always going to be around. It seems to always be able to compete. The one that I'm most excited about right now that seems to have a ton of potential seems to be the High Evolutionary Lockdown deck. It just seems so strong, flexible, ways to win, ways to lock your opponents out. It seems like a really, really strong deck. The other 3 are very solid as well. Discard, been around for forever, going to be a very consistent deck for you. Pretty much plays itself, so if you just need to go on autopilot as you're watching YouTube or something like that, not a bad deck to pick. And then we've got the Null deck. Again, kind of a surprising inclusion. Definitely something a little bit different. Kind of a twist on these Destroy decks that we haven't really seen before. And one I like other than Angel. And then our last one is the classic Patriot. So these have been the 5 decks that are kind of running the meta right now. I appreciate y'all for watching the video and hanging out till now. And if you haven't hit that subscribe or like button, now would be a good time to do so. But until next time, have some fun.